How the heck can a short video about Dune manage to change the way you view all works of fiction and end up including clips from Gladiator,
Are you not entertained?
Dr. Evil,
I want to plan what?
Superman,
A friend.
and even never-before-seen footage from the recent movies?
I want to know if you killed Jessica and Paul. Who, me? Of course not. No. Never ever crossed my mind.
Well, I guess you'll just have to stay here and find out. I promise you won't regret it, especially because everybody tells me that the best parts are towards the end. But listen, if you watch it all the way through and don't enjoy it, you can give me a thumbs down, blacklist my channel and never come back. It's only fair. Now buckle up, brain travelers, because before we start unzipping the veil of Dune's narrative calamities, we must first take care of a little trigger alert! This video may offend not just the unconditional lovers of Dune, both the book and the film, but also fans of entirely different characters, works, and even whole franchises, including Aladdin, Star Trek, Marvel, and many more. If you're so insecure about your tastes that you can't stand them being subjected to reasoned criticism, then I suggest you stop watching right about now. Maybe go touch yourself with The Last Jedi or some other crap like that. Okay, you've been given fair warning, so don't come crying later, because the festivities are about to begin in 3, 2, 1. To begin with, before we start discussing works of fiction, let's just make sure we're all on the same page. Pun fully intended. In order to visit an author's imaginary world, we, the audience, must partake in a form of collective hallucination known as suspension of disbelief. Otherwise, we would never be able to enjoy stories populated by magic aliens, talking dragons, psychic robots, etc. However, this does not mean that those worlds have no rules at all. Each author has the freedom to require a different degree of suspension from us, and that's perfectly fine. In their own world, they are God, so they can make up whatever rules they fancy. But once they have been established, those rules are sacred and must be followed throughout the entire story. Because when authors are inconsistent with their own rules, then they are no longer requiring suspension of disbelief, but suspension of logic, and that swiftly demotes them from gods to shoddy writers. And that's how we get to the subject of today's video essay. If you recall, in the first part we talked about how Frank Herbert put a lot of effort into making his Dune universe believable. And although he definitely did a great job, much more than many other authors and certainly his imitators, he still left several inconsistencies. Now, this is not necessarily a big deal. In fact, it's pretty much inevitable, because when creating a work of science fiction, authors are forced to reach a compromise between those two terms. Some writers will abide more heavily by the science. That's what we call hard science fiction, while others are more concerned with the fiction. And that's what we call, you guessed it, soft science fiction. To be clear, neither is necessarily better than the other. It's entirely a matter of personal taste. That said, we must also understand that the extremes of this spectrum are no longer science fiction. And why is that? Well, because if we move far enough towards the more sciencey side, in other words, if we don't suspend any disbelief at all, then anything that has been invented by the author's imagination is quickly dismantled, and we basically end up with Pride and Prejudice. Yeah, it's still fiction, but it could just as well be a real story that actually happened to you. Well, I guess to your great-great-great-grandmother, Elizabeth. On the other hand, if we move too far towards the other side, then we start playing loosey-goosey with the laws of physics. And before you know it, we cross over into the realm of fantasy, where those laws cease to apply altogether. And that's why, in that realm, is where we find things like intergalactic predators that hunt alien xenomorph parasites, midichlorians that give you superpowers, and all that sort of weird and wonderful stuff. Yeah, you heard that right. Star Wars is not science fiction, it's fantasy. Deal with it. And if we keep going even further in that direction, then we eventually arrive to, well, you know.
Welcome to Ponyville!
Incidentally, this is the reason why I personally find a lot of critiques of fiction works to be rather pointless, because they use science as a stick to flog books and movies with. But it's simply unfair to judge those works by a crossbar that it was never their goal to clear. For example, I once read an essay critiquing Spider-Man where the guy complained that it was biochemically preposterous that you could obtain superpowers from the bite of a genetically mutated spider. And of course my reaction was, what? Really? So you have an ultra-charismatic hero like Peter Parker, who has boatloads of exciting adventures, fighting an awesome cast of villains, and you choose to focus on that aspect? What the hell are you reading comics for then? Get the fuck out, you miserable git. You tell him, Russell.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
So anyway, fiction. The point bears repeating once more because it's the crux of this video essay and the one thing I would like you to take away from it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with either one of the extremes. Jane Austen, Star Wars and My Little Pony are all perfectly enjoyable. But what they are most definitely not is science fiction, because they don't keep any sort of balance between the two terms. And that balance between science and fiction is what I find most interesting, because it means that, inherently, a work of sci-fi can never be 100% flawless. And so it fascinates me to see how each author deals with the common issues that always crop up when we look at the future. And now that we got all that lengthy explanation out of the way, we can finally get into what you came here for, the shaky bits in Dune. As we said at the start, the book has several plot holes. Some are tiny, like the squeak of a desert mouse, while others could house a dozen sandworms with room to spare. But don't worry, we won't discuss them all. Partly because that would take far too long, but mainly because I don't feel like tearing the whole book apart. Instead, we'll focus just on the ones pertaining to the human institutions that Frank Herbert invented, and we'll use each of them as illustrations of narrative mistakes that are very common in other works of science fiction. So, without further ado, tighten your still suits, drink a bit of your filtered pee, gotta keep hydrated, and come with me to visit a few questionable points in the lore of Frank Herbert's masterpiece, Dune. First up, we have an error which is by far the most common in fiction, and that's lacking internal consistency. Specifically, in sci-fi, this usually manifests when an author makes up a new scientific invention or technology in order to serve some purpose for the plot, but then totally disregards any other effect it would have in the world. This results in poor world building, because in reality, as soon as a new technology is invented, lots of different people will start experimenting with it, trying to find out all that it can do and coming up with all sorts of innovative applications. Just like gunpowder was initially used as a medicine, but quickly gave rise to weapons and fireworks. The thing is, once you have this mental model, you see it in most works of fiction, because there are countless examples. Doc, from Back to the Future, who not only invents a time machine, but also a small fusion reactor. And yet, they are simply used as plot devices, and then, once they've served their purpose, they are conveniently ignored. Then we have the replicators and transporters in Star Trek, which could be used to solve half the problems that the crew face, but only ever seem to be used to make
Tea Earl Grey hot
and replace elevators. And of course, in comic books we have dozens of genius scientists, any of whom could easily eradicate poverty and world hunger in a weekend, but instead prefer to spend their time parading around in fancy underwear. Okay, now that we've explained the concept, let's use that lens to examine Dune. In addition to their cool name, I love the concept of mentats, because we've seen plenty of explorations of what the future could look like upon the emergence of an artificial superintelligence, but I personally have encountered very few that focus on natural superintelligence. And even then, most of those are not particularly well done, such as in crappy films like Transcendence, Lucy or The Lawnmower Man, which appear to have put all their effort into securing big-name stars and left the actual screenwriting to a bunch of chimps with typewriters. I've heard good things about Limitless, but I haven't seen it yet. Fortunately, we can always rely on literature to save the day. In this case, with works like Ted Chiang's Understand, Baxter and Clark's The Light of Other Days, and, in a very broad way, the outstanding short story The Last Question by our Lord and Saviour Isaac Asimov. Praise be, praise be. Seriously, it's awesome. Go read it. Actually, go read all of Asimov's stuff that you can get your hands on. It's pure cinnamon. However, since natural superintelligence is just one possible shape of the future, and more importantly, the only one where we humans are not rendered totally obsolete like a 13-month-old Apple product, I believe it is a matter of survival of our species that there are more works on this theme. If nothing else, at least to inspire the young people who will have to make it a reality, because that singularity is not more than one generation away, if that. Anyway, after that cheerful note, and then I wonder why nobody invites me to their parties. Let's get back to our subject. I feel that mentats were criminally underused in Dune, both by Herbert outside the book and by the ruling houses inside it. Honestly, I was disappointed and also surprised that they didn't play a much bigger role in running the universe. Don't get me wrong, as I mentioned in the first video, I really love that Herbert gave us a plausible reason for why humans chose not to create artificial superintelligences and instead opted for developing the human mind. I think that was a stroke of genius. However, by then adding humans with mental superpowers, he just reintroduced that key issue into his universe. Because once you have mentats, who are basically human supercomputers, what would prevent them from taking over? Frankly, what it seems to me is that Herbert didn't entirely grasp the impact that a higher level intelligence has on its environment. But that's quite normal, because superintelligence is not something that we humans are naturally wired to grasp. Nobody in the entirety of human history has ever been far smarter than everybody else. So we cannot truly conceive an intelligence that is 10 times as smart as Einstein. 10 or more. But nevertheless, we must remember that our superior intelligence is the characteristic that has allowed us to become the absolute and unchallenged masters of the planet. So now try to imagine a group of people with intelligences that are so far above the average human as that average human is above a capybara. They would practically be a different species. And, by the way, that species would immediately become the absolute dominant one in the world, just like we dominate all other living creatures on Earth and don't ever stop to consider how our actions affect them. So, returning to Dune's mentats, here's the thing. Either they do have unquestionably better minds than any other human, or they don't. If they do, then it seems highly illogical that someone like Thufir Hawat, let alone an evil turd like Peter de Vries, would be content to just act as a walking iPad for an inferior creature. Whereas if they don't have a better mind, then there is no real difference between a mentat and a regular smart person. And then, what's the point in having mentats altogether? But this is not a very serious issue, since it could be resolved quite easily, for example by explaining that they are hamstrung by some form of control or perhaps have some inherent weakness. In fact, I suppose that the addiction to spice and saffron juice was introduced for just this purpose. Otherwise, Herbert could have simply omitted the concept of mentats altogether, even though it would have been a real pity and a loss for the story. But since he didn't really need to introduce the mentats anyway, and we could either remove them or fix this flaw with just one paragraph, I don't consider this to be a big problem. However, the next issue that we're going to look at is not quite so trivial. In the previous section, we started out by explaining the underlying narrative error in detail. But this time, we're going to adhere to the first rule of creative writing and show rather than tell. Here are some examples. Did you spot it? No? Okay, I'll give you a clue. What do all these morons getting shot have in common? That's right, they're all wearing armor. But it ain't just any sort of armor, this is a very particular kind. It's useless armor. Yep, you're seeing a very common narrative blunder, whereby characters appear to have some form of protection, but then, when the plot requires it, that armor becomes as useless as the 2 bloody years of Latin I had to do in school. I'll never forget and I'll never forgive. As far as Dune is concerned, the issue we're going to discuss now is very similar to the previous one, in that it has the same cause, introducing a concept that wasn't really necessary, and also could have been solved very easily by adding a paragraph to bypass the problem. But in this case, it's more egregious because it involves the incident on which the entire plot hinges, namely, how Baron Harkonnen manages to overcome Dr. Yue's unbreakable imperial conditioning. Great story set on imperial conditioning. It's assumed that ultimate conditioning cannot be removed without killing the subject. However, given the right lever, you can move a planet. We found the lever that moved the Doctor. How? Feyd-Rautha asked. He found this a fascinating subject. Everyone knew you couldn't subvert imperial conditioning. Another time, the Baron said. Continue, Peiter. I remember reading this and being just as intrigued as Feyd-Rautha. You see, I was imagining the lever to be some extremely convoluted and twisted process, because, as anyone who has sat through a recent Marvel movie can tell you, humans are capable of enduring extreme levels of psychological pain. So, given how powerful the conditioning is made out to be, the process required to remove it had to be something extremely unusual, right? Right? Mac, wrong. As we discover just a little bit later, it's just the oldest trick in the book. You promised to deliver Maiwana from her agony. The Baron nodded. Oh yes, that was how we bent the imperial conditioning. You couldn't endure seeing your Bene Gesserit witch grovel in Peiter's pain amplifiers. Whoa, wait a minute. Seriously? Freaking blackmail? So you're telling me that this supposedly unbreakable barrier is broken with the most mundane method imaginable? The first thing that you would try on literally anyone? Well, that was a fucking disappointment. I guess the imperial conditioning didn't work as advertised. In fact, it worked just like... And there's really only one comparison we can make, isn't there?
Franz, could you try to break this glass, please?
Sure?
Yeah. Oh my fucking god.
Yep, I have to say that was disappointing, disenchanting, disillusioning, and a whole lot of other terrible adjectives. And what really bugs me is that, just like in the case of Mentats, Herbert didn't need to introduce the imperial conditioning in the first place. He could have simply justified the trust placed in Dr. Yue in a different way. Oh, but wait a minute, he actually did that. My father had an instinct for his friends, Paul said. He gave his love sparingly, but with never an error. His weakness lay in misunderstanding hatred. He thought anyone who hated Harkonnens could not betray him. So there really wasn't any need at all to include the imperial conditioning. That said, I totally understand why he did it, because it's a really cool concept, and that's perfectly fine by me. I'm glad he left it in the book because it makes for a more interesting story, and that's what we all want. But since he did, I think he should have also found a way of breaking it that did justice to the expectations he created. Because here's the thing, it wouldn't have been all that difficult. He could have just added one paragraph providing a more suitable explanation. For example, something like, since we know that at some point the Harkonnens managed to kidnap Yue's wife, then it could be that they also captured him, and then spent months subjecting him to all sorts of psychological brainwashing and sadistic torture, with hypnosis, chiropractics, phrenology, Scientology, country music, English food, and other nasty shit like that. Seriously, anything but boring blackmail. Because that way it sounds like something I might have written. And just to be clear, that is not a good thing. In addition, with the way the treason unfolds, Herbert makes Lady Jessica appear quite useless at her job and thus indirectly responsible for the entire mess, since, as a Bene Gesserit's truthsayer, she was supposed to be able to detect any treachery among the people closest to them, but Yue managed to deflect her quite easily. Forgive me, my lady, my thoughts were far away. I did not mean to be familiar. She smiled. Wellington, please. Yue ventured a thin smile, thinking, I believe it has worked. Now she'll think anything unusual in my manner is due to embarrassment. She'll not look for deeper reasons when she believes she already knows the answer. And not only that, the Atreides also haven't done their due diligence on him, which is quite shocking considering he's the family doctor, an extremely delicate position. We are indeed behind the Harkonnen veil, he said. Perhaps we'll... He broke off, noting the sudden, intense way she was looking at him. Is something wrong? The way you say Harkonnen, she said. Even my Duke's voice doesn't carry that weight of venom when he uses the hated name. I didn't know you had personal reasons to hate them, Wellington. Which begs the question, how come she only just sensed this now, after years of having him as their family doctor? Seriously, Jessica, you keep dropping the ball. And this is not a one-off thing. In fact, this issue of portraying the Bene Gesserit as a very powerful in theory, but actually quite useless in practice, is a constant trend with Herbert. And that leads us very smoothly into the last point. You know, I'm so old that I was lucky enough to live through the times when Disney still made good films, and one of my favourites is Aladdin. I think both the original story on which the film is based and the way it was brought to the screen were fantastic. Except for one vital point, which unfortunately dismantles everything once you spot it. So, spoiler alert! If you can't guess what I'm referring to and you don't want to have the film ruined forever, you should stop watching this video right now. The scene I'm talking about takes place at the very end, when Jafar has finally gotten his dirty mitts on the lamp, made himself the Sultan and a powerful sorcerer, and is about to squash Aladdin in the form of a giant snake. But then, at the very last moment, Aladdin tricks him into his own downfall by making him wish to become a genie.
And everything that goes with it.
Remember that? That ending is awesome. But even as a kid, I remember thinking, what the fuck? Seriously? You're telling me that this evil genius spent donkey's years searching for the lamp, but never spent 5 minutes considering what he would actually wish for once he got it? Come on. This, my gentle audience, is the common narrative mistake known as the dumb genius, which consists in an otherwise smart character who, at some crucial point in the plot, makes a completely stupid mistake that is totally out of place for an otherwise brilliant mind. One such dumb genius is Dr. Stephen Strange, a top-level neurosurgeon who almost died because he was looking at his phone while speeding along a mountain road at night in the rain. Yeah. Okay. Another example is Lois Lane, an outstanding investigative journalist who doesn't recognize Superman as her own boyfriend because he wears glasses. Right. Yeah.
Who are you?
A friend.
And then we have the Emperor of the Galaxy, who decides to set an ambush for the rebels, but instead of feeding them false intel to send them to a perfectly safe location for his trap, he lets them find out exactly where to find the Death Star's shield generator.
It was I who allowed the Alliance to know the location of the shield generator.
What an idiot. In other cases, the dumb genius doesn't make a specific mistake per se, but rather pursues a goal that makes no sense once you stop to analyze it. A good example of this are most of the villains in James Bond movies, who tend to have massive resources at their disposal, money, people, technology, to the point that they could threaten almost any country, and yet their objectives and motives are rarely explained beyond "conquer the world, mwahaha." If you still haven't guessed what this concept has to do with Dune, let me put you out of your suspense. The reason why I'm explaining it is because, after I die, I'm going to find Frank Herbert up in Geek Heaven, and one of the many questions I will ask him is, what was the Bene Gesserit's master plan? I mean, considering they were already the power behind the great houses and pulled even the Emperor's strings, what the hell did they want or need the Kwisatz Haderach for anyway? Honestly, a matriarchal society seeking to breed an all-powerful male seems like such a be careful what you wish for lest it come true cliché that they might as well have called him the Kwisatz Haderachenstein. It's so silly that it's literally comic strip material. And that's not the only example of the Bene Gesserit's ineptitude, because after showing them as dumb geniuses, Herbert keeps dumping on them by showing that they have a variation of the useless armor trope we saw earlier, a useless superpower. We already mentioned their ability of truth-saying, and right off the bat, I take issue with that name. Truth-saying. I'm sorry, but from that name, I understand that the power of truth-saying is saying the truth. If the power is knowing when someone is not saying the truth, or more accurately, detecting a lie, then it should be called lie detecting. I can even concede lie hearing. But look, let's just move on or we'll get sucked into the naming spiral, and we already did that in the first video. So, truth saying. That power is put to very good use in the plot when it is given as the reason why Baron Harkonnen has Paul and Jessica left out in the desert instead of executed. He doesn't want to order them killed directly so that he won't get into trouble with the Bene Gesserit if he's interrogated by the Emperor's truthsayer, Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam. Yes, I know I didn't need to say her whole name, but it's just so good I can't help myself. Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam. Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam. Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam.
Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam. Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam.
Brrr. Anyway, kudos to Herbert for not making the Baron a total idiot, incapable of killing a protagonist, like the ones we're used to seeing in stories from back then, to the point where it's become a caricature.
Wait, aren't you even gonna watch them? They could get away.
No. I'm going to leave them alone and not actually witness them dying. I'm just going to assume it all went to plan. What?
But here's the thing. Although we do get an explanation as to why the Baron doesn't have them executed outright, that explanation makes less sense than the Fahrenheit scale. I mean, come on. How inept would one need to be to have the power of truth-saying and yet be so easily deceived?
Hello, Baron Harkonnen. Greetings, Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam. Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam. Eh? Why do you repeat my name? No reason. So, why did you come to see me? I want to know if you killed Jessica and Paul. Who, me? Of course not. No. Never ever crossed my mind. Ah, well, I suspected you had. Should I ask some further questions to probe a little deeper? Because, since you know I'm a truthsayer, you would therefore have done things indirectly. Meh, I guess not. Okay, bye now.
So basically these truthsayers are less capable of finding out the truth than my girlfriend? Wait a minute, maybe my girlfriend is a Bene Gesserit. I mean, she can definitely use the voice. Shit, does that mean I'm part of their breeding program too?
Hey, what are you muttering into that computer? You've been at it all day. Get off now and come and rub my feet.
Yes, dear. Sorry guys, I was going to talk about the differences between the book and the movie, but it looks like I'm going to have to leave it for a future video.